While the world saw a billionaire's funeral, no one noticed the woman standing alone outside the iron gates. For 30 years, she was the great, unspoken love of his life, a secret kept from his powerful family and from every headline right up until the day they buried him. She was a simple flower seller. He was an heir to a corporate dynasty. This is the true story of a 3-decade secret, a love affair conducted in shadows, and the immense social walls that even vast fortune could not break down. But how does a love that lasts a lifetime remain completely invisible? And what does her solitary grief, witnessed by no one, finally force us to see? It began, as many impossible stories do, in a place of mundane beauty. A small flower stall on a cobblestone square, where a young man named Elliot Vance, heir to the Vance Consolidated Empire, first saw the woman who would quietly occupy his heart for the rest of his life. Her name was Clara. She was 24, with dark, thoughtful eyes and hands that were both gentle and strong from years of arranging stems and tying bouquets. Elliot was 26, freshly graduated from an Ivy League business school and being groomed to take over a billion-dollar family conglomerate. Their worlds were not just separate, they were designed to be mutually exclusive. The Vance family name was synonymous with old money, private clubs, and marriages that functioned as corporate mergers. Clara's world was one of early mornings at the flower market, modest rent, and a quiet independence forged from necessity. He bought a single white rose from her that first day, claiming it was for his mother. He returned the next day for lilies. By the third day, they were talking. He learned she had built the stall herself, that she could name every cultivar in Latin, and that her laughter was a soft, genuine sound that seemed to startle even her. He learned that behind the tailored suit and the famous last name was a man who felt like a ghost in his own life, already weary of the predetermined path stretching before him. Their connection was immediate and profound, a meeting of two souls who recognized a similar loneliness in the other. For months, their relationship existed in stolen hours. Long walks in the public gardens where no one knew them, coffee in out-of-the-way diners, conversations that stretched late into the night over a park bench. It was a secret garden of their own making. To Elliot, Clara represented authenticity, a life lived with purpose outside the gilded cage of expectation. To Clara, Elliot was not a title, but a curious, kind man who listened to her dreams as if they were blueprints for a cathedral. But this secret, however precious, existed under a looming shadow. The Vance family. Elliot's father, Charles Vance, was a titan of industry whose approval was a currency more valuable than gold. His mother, Elena, was the architect of their social standing, for whom reputation was everything. They had a plan for Elliot, a swift ascent within the company, followed by a strategic marriage to the daughter of a rival shipping magnate, a union that would consolidate market power and produce suitable heirs. Elliot's younger sister, Penelope, was the wild card, sharp, observant, and deeply embedded in the family's social circle. The pressure was not subtle. Family dinners were interrogations. Conversations were peppered with reminders of duty and legacy. The unspoken rule was absolute. Personal sentiment could never compromise the balance sheet. For over a year, Elliot managed the double life. He excelled in the boardroom by day and found solace with Clara by night. He believed, with the fervent optimism of first love, that he could bridge the gap, that his success could eventually buy him the freedom to choose. He was wrong. The first crack appeared subtly. A Society columnist published a vague, cheeky item about a certain young tycoon being spotted mingling outside his usual rarefied atmosphere. No names were used, but the description of the location, the square with the flower market, was enough to send a tremor through the Vance household. Charles Vance summoned Elliot to his wood-paneled study. He did not yell. His voice was calm, cold, and final. He presented it not as a father's concern, but as a CEO delivering a risk assessment. "This dalliance," he said, swirling a glass of brandy, "is a liability. It shows poor judgment. It makes you, and by extension this family, look frivolous. It ends now," Elliot argued. He spoke of happiness, of connection, things that sounded feeble and naive in that room filled with portraits of stern ancestors. His father's response was a lesson in transactional reality. "Love," Charles had repeated, as if diagnosing a quaint disease. "Love is what you build with the right partner over decades of shared ambition. What you are describing is an emotional indulgence, and indulgences have costs." He then laid out the cost. If Elliot continued to see Clara, he would be removed from the succession plan. His trust fund, his access, His very place in the family would be systematically dismantled. He would be, in every way that mattered to the world he knew, disinherited. That night, heart heavy with a despair he'd never known, Elliot went to Clara. He laid out the ultimatum, not as a threat, but as a horrifying reality. He expected tears, anger. Instead, Clara was quiet for a long time, her gaze fixed on the single candle flickering between them on her small kitchen table. When she finally spoke, her voice was clear, etched with a painful dignity. "I will not be the reason you lose your family," she said, "and I will not be your secret. A love that has to hide isn't a foundation, it's a prison for both of us." She was giving him an out, but it felt like a sentence. In that moment, Elliot faced the true test of his character, and he failed it. The weight of his world, the expectation, the identity, the sheer scale of what he was being asked to walk away from crushed his courage. He did not choose Clara, he chose the path of least resistance. He walked out of her life, believing it was the only responsible, if heartbreaking, decision. He threw himself into the family business, achieving the success that was demanded of him. He dated women from the approved social register. To the outside world, Elliot Vance became the perfect heir, but the silence he carried within him was deafening. He thought of Clara every day. A song, the scent of roses, a glimpse of a flower stall, any could trigger a wave of regret so acute it was physical. He sent anonymous gifts to her stall through intermediaries, a new awning to shield her from the rain, a vintage book on botany he knew she'd love. They were unsigned apologies, tokens of a connection he could not sever, even as he lacked the courage to renew it. And Clara, she never married. She built her small flower business into a modest, respected shop. She lived a life of quiet integrity, surrounded by beauty she cultivated herself. She knew, in the way you know the rhythm of your own heart, that Elliot never stopped loving her. The proof arrived like clockwork every year on her birthday, a single, perfect white rose delivered without a card, a silent promise, a ghost of a life not lived. This fragile, silent détente lasted for years, then decades, two parallel lives running side by side, never touching. Elliot became the billionaire CEO. Clara remained the beloved local florist. He navigated mergers and acquisitions. She nurtured seedlings and bridal bouquets. They were separated by a chasm of class, yet bound by a thread of memory so strong it defied time. But a secret of this magnitude creates its own gravity. It bends the lives around it, and the pressure was building. The family's plan was reaching its final stage, the long-anticipated marriage alliance. The wedding date was set. The society pages were buzzing. Elliot was now in his 50s, standing at the pinnacle of everything his family had ever wanted for him, feeling more hollow than ever. And then, 3 months before he was to walk down the aisle in a cathedral filled with the city's elite, Elliot did the unthinkable. He drove himself, without a driver, to a quiet street across town. He parked and watched from his car as Clara, now with streaks of gray in her dark hair, closed up her shop for the evening. He watched her sweep the step, lock the door, and pause for a moment, looking up at the twilight sky with an expression of such serene loneliness that it shattered him. In that instant, 30 years of regret crystallized into a single, desperate impulse. He got out of the car. For the first time in 3 decades, they stood face to face on the quiet sidewalk. The years fell away in an instant, not in their appearance, but in the unguarded recognition that flashed between them. "Clara," he said, and her name was a confession and a plea in one breath. She didn't speak, just looked at him, her expression a complex map of shock, old pain, and a weary understanding. He had expected anger, a door closed in his face. Instead, she simply said, "You look tired, Elliot." And in that simple observation, all his defenses crumbled. They went to a small, closed cafe nearby, the owner letting Clara in with a knowing nod. Over tea that grew cold, the dam broke. Elliot spoke in a torrent, 30 years of silent regret, the hollow victories, the impending marriage he could not face. He told her about the anonymous gifts, the yearly rose, the way her memory had been the only true compass in a life of performed duty. Clara listened, her hands folded around her cup. When he finished, spent and raw, she spoke with a calm that belied the tremor in her hands. "I never stopped loving you either," she said quietly, "but love wasn't the question, was it? The question was always about courage, and you left because you didn't have enough." It was the truth, delivered without malice, and it cut deeper than any accusation. That night began a new, more dangerous chapter. Elliot, for the first time, chose defiance. He began seeing Clara in secret again, but now the stakes were catastrophic. He was a 56-year-old billionaire weeks away from a wedding that was the culmination of his family's 50-year business strategy. The scandal of a last-minute cancellation would not just be personal, it would be a financial earthquake, tanking stock prices and unraveling alliances worth billions. Yet in Clara's small apartment above the shop, surrounded by the scent of drying lavender and earth, he felt more alive than he had in decades. He made a desperate plan. He would go through with the wedding ceremony to avoid the immediate corporate implosion, but he would not sign the updated, ironclad prenuptial agreement his fiancée's lawyers had drawn up. Without that signature, the marriage, in the eyes of the corporate entities and trusts, would be functionally hollow. He would then seek a quiet annulment after a discrete period, citing irreconcilable differences, and use the ensuing, controlled chaos to finally extricate himself from the family's direct control. It was a risky, morally ambiguous gamble, but to Elliot, it felt like the only way to navigate the prison he had built for himself. He believed he could thread the needle. He was wrong. The first sign of trouble came from an unexpected quarter, his sister, Penelope. Sharp and perceptive, she noticed the change in him, a lightness that contradicted the stress he should have been feeling. She saw the unfamiliar softness in his eyes, the way he'd sometimes disappear for an afternoon without his driver. Penelope had always been the keeper of the family's social secrets. Using her extensive network, she had a private investigator make a few discreet inquiries. The report that landed in her hands was succinct and devastating. Photographs of Elliot entering a florist's shop after hours, time-stamped and unambiguous. Penelope didn't go to their father. She went directly to Elliot's fiancée, Camille. For Penelope, this wasn't about morality, it was about risk management. A scandal after the wedding would be worse than one before it. Camille, a woman whose ambition was as polished as her jewelry, reacted not with heartbreak, but with cold, strategic fury. She had not invested 2 years of her life into securing the Vance legacy to be humiliated by a middle-aged man's nostalgia for a flower seller. She and Penelope formed a temporary, lethal alliance. Their strategy was not to confront Elliot, but to neutralize the threat. They targeted Clara. One morning, a well-dressed woman from the city's licensing bureau arrived at Clara's shop. There were suddenly questions about permit renewals, zoning for a residential space above a commercial property, and a frivolous but time-consuming complaint about sidewalk obstruction from a concerned citizen. Then, Clara's primary wholesale supplier, a company that had done business with her for 20 years, abruptly cancelled her contract, citing new corporate policies. The message was clear, elegant, and deniable. Her world, the one she had built with her own hands, was fragile. It could be dismantled with a few phone calls. Elliot discovered what was happening when Clara, pride warring with panic, finally told him she might have to close the shop. He was furious. He confronted Penelope, who received him in her impeccably decorated office with a look of detached pity. "You're not a teenager sneaking out, Elliot. You're the CEO of a publicly traded company. That woman is a vulnerability. We are simply assessing the structural integrity of your decisions," she said, her voice like chilled steel. "Call off your dogs, Penny," he demanded. "Or what?" she replied, a cold smile touching her lips. "You'll run to your florist? Do you think father does know? He's choosing to ignore it, hoping you'll come to your senses. But if you force this, if you embarrass this family on the eve of this merger by marriage, he will not ignore it. He will break you, and he will break her completely." For the first time, Elliot understood the true nature of the cage. It wasn't just about disinheritance. It was about capacity. His family, and now his fiancée, had the means to erase Clara's life's work without leaving a single fingerprint. They could make her unemployable, bankrupt, and anonymous. And he, for all his billions, was trapped in a web of interdependent assets and board obligations. Liquidating enough to protect her independently would trigger the very crisis he was trying to avoid. He was paralyzed. He tried to mitigate, setting up a dummy corporation to buy out Clara's supplier contract and hiring a powerful land use attorney to handle the city issues. But for every move he made, the pressure on Clara intensified. A local newspaper ran a smearing, anonymous tip about questionable business practices at a long-standing local flower shop. Old friends began to cross the street to avoid her. The psychological warfare was exact and brutal. Clara, to her immense credit, did not crumble. She looked at Elliot, seeing the torment in his eyes, and said the words that would change everything. "You have to let me go, again, for real this time." But Elliot couldn't. The thought was untenable. In a moment of desperate clarity, he made a decision. He would not go through with the wedding at all. He would take the financial hit, face his father's wrath, and protect Clara by finally fully choosing her. He arranged to meet her one last time to tell her his decision, to promise her that he was finally ready to walk away from it all. That meeting never happened. On his way to her, Elliot's car was T-boned by a delivery truck running a red light. The impact was catastrophic. He was rushed to the hospital with massive internal injuries. The family closed ranks. News was controlled, released in careful drips. Elliot Vance, CEO, in serious but stable condition following a tragic accident. Camille, the fiancée, was photographed arriving at the hospital, her face a mask of concerned propriety, instantly crafting the narrative of the devoted partner. Clara heard about the accident on the local news 12 hours later. She went to the hospital, of course. But she was stopped at the entrance to the private wing by a discreet but firm security detail. "Family only, ma'am." She tried calling his private number. It went straight to voicemail. She was invisible, as she had always been in his world. For 3 days, she haunted the hospital cafeteria and the public gardens nearby, a ghost in the machinery of his life, gathering fragments of information from nurses on smoke breaks. She learned his prognosis was dire. She learned the family was discussing end-of-life arrangements. And she learned, with a cold, sinking certainty, that she would not be allowed to say goodbye. On the 4th day, Elliot Vance died without regaining consciousness. The official cause was a sudden complication from his injuries. The obituaries were lavish, painting the portrait of a titan of industry, a devoted son, a loyal fiancé, and a philanthropist. His funeral was planned as a state occasion, a gathering of power, politics, and old money. Invitations were a coveted social token, and Clara, the woman who had held his heart for 30 years, was not on the list. She bought a simple black dress. She took a single white rose from her own cooler, the last of a variety he had once told her was his favorite, and she stood outside the ornate iron gates of the historic cemetery, watching as the world he belonged to said farewell to the man she knew. But what she didn't know, what none of the mourners in their tailored black knew, was that Elliot Vance had left one final, silent rebellion. In the chaotic hours after his accident, before he slipped into the coma from which he would not wake, he had been briefly, lucidly conscious. With a nurse as his witness, he had dictated a single, concise addendum to his will, a document that had been filed with his attorney before the family could intervene. It concerned a specific, non-financial bequest. And the contents of that addendum were about to detonate the careful fiction of his life, just as his coffin was being lowered into the ground. The will reading took place in the oak-paneled boardroom of Vance Consolidated 24 hours after the last mourner had left the cemetery. The air was thick with the unspoken arithmetic of billions. Charles Vance presided, his grief subsumed by the procedural gravity of succession. Then the family's lead attorney, a man named Arthur Greville, cleared his throat and read the final, unexpected codicil. "Item 7, he began, his voice neutral. "Being of sound mind in the moments following my accident, I hereby amend my last will and testament. To Clara Marie Renard, of 22 Hawthorne Lane, I bequeath not any share of my financial estate, but the entirety of my personal correspondence, journals, and the copyright to my unpublished memoir, titled The Unkept Garden. The physical manuscripts are held in a safety deposit box at First Merchant Trust, box number 714. This bequest is made in recognition of a debt of truth that outweighs all others." A stunned silence blanketed the room. Camille was the first to break it. "His unpublished what?" she hissed. Charles Vance's face was granite. "What is the financial exposure?" he demanded of Greville. The attorney adjusted his glasses. "Minimal, directly. The manuscript has no assigned monetary value. The copyright, however, gives Ms. Renard control over any future publication." Penelope, ever the strategist, saw the trap. "It's a landmine," she said quietly. "He's given her the story, our story." They moved swiftly to contain it. A team of Vance lawyers descended on First Merchant Trust with a court order seeking to impound the contents of the box, arguing potential defamation and breach of family privacy. They were met by a poised, older woman in a sharp suit, Clara's attorney, a renowned First Amendment litigator named Isabel Reed, whom Elliot had privately retained for Clara the week before his accident. The legal standoff made the business section of the newspaper Vance Heirs battle unknown woman over CEO's diaries. The spectacle was exactly what the family feared. The controlled narrative of Elliot's life began to crack. Isabel Reed, on Clara's behalf, filed a counter-motion and gave a single, calculated statement to the press. My client seeks only to accept a personal gift from a dear old friend. The Vance family's attempt to seize private writings composed by a grown man is both legally dubious and profoundly telling. Public sympathy, that fickle tide, began to turn. Who was this mystery woman? Why was a billion-dollar empire so terrified of a few journals? Camille, feeling her social position destabilize, launched a covert smear campaign. Anonymous tips fed to gossip columnists painted Clara as a cunning opportunist who had preyed on a lonely, older man. But the story had holes. Reporters digging into Clara's life found a woman with a spotless reputation, a small business celebrated by her community, and no history of financial claims or litigation. Then a local news reporter, tipped by a source inside the hospital, broke a smaller human interest story. Mystery woman was regular visitor during Vance's final days. It described Clara's vigil in the hospital gardens, her turned-away attempts to see him. The image was potent, the powerful family inside, the solitary woman kept outside. The pressure was building on all sides. And then Clara made her move. Through her lawyer, she proposed a settlement. She would not publish the memoir. She would surrender the copyright back to the Vance family. In exchange, she asked for two things. First, a public, factual statement acknowledging her 30-year friendship with Elliot to clear her name of the gold digger accusations. Second, the establishment of a charitable foundation in Elliot's name, focused on horticultural therapy and vocational training for underserved communities, with a seed donation of $5 million and Clara installed as a lifetime director. It was a masterstroke. It was peaceful, philanthropic, and impossible for the family to refuse without looking like monsters. Charles Vance, recognizing a strategic retreat when he saw one, agreed. The press release was drafted. A quiet victory for dignity seemed at hand, but Penelope Vance was not satisfied. The humiliation, the near scandal, the very existence of Clara as a testament to her brother's secret self it grated. She wanted Clara erased, not negotiated with. She initiated one final, reckless play. Using a shell company, she contacted a disgraced former employee of Clara's shop, a man who had been fired for theft years prior. She offered him a substantial sum to come forward with a new story, to claim that Clara had known about the memoir for years, that she had collaborated with Elliot to extort the family, and that the accident had simply accelerated their plan. It was a dangerous, flimsy lie, but with enough money and legal firepower behind it, it could create enough doubt to derail the settlement and tarnish Clara permanently. The plan was set in motion. The former employee, a man named David, scheduled a meeting with a tabloid journalist. But here is where secrets within secrets surface. David, anxious about the meeting and needing liquid courage, talked too much in a bar the night before, and in that bar was Miss Ada, the elderly, sharp-eared proprietor of the boarding house where Clara had lived 30 years ago. Miss Ada had watched the whole saga on the news. She heard David slurring about easy money and sticking it to the rich florist. She called Clara immediately. Clara in turn called Isabel Reed, and Isabel Reed called Charles Vance directly, bypassing Penelope. She played a recording, provided by Miss Ada, of David's drunken boasts. Then she delivered an ultimatum: call off your daughter's idiotic conspiracy, Mr. Vance, and let this settlement proceed. Or I will take this recording, the evidence of subornation of perjury, and every page of Elliot's memoir, which details, by the way, your specific threats and the family's campaign of coercion, and I will hold a press conference that will make yesterday's headlines look like a birthday announcement. You will not survive the regulatory and shareholder fallout. Charles Vance was a man who understood power. He saw the checkmate. In a furious private confrontation, he forced Penelope to dismantle the scheme and sign over control of her voting shares in the family trust to him for a period of 5 years. She was effectively neutered. The settlement proceeded. The press release went out. The Elliot Vance Foundation was established. Clara's name was cleared. It appeared to be over. A week after the foundation announcement, a package arrived at Clara's shop. It was from Arthur Greville, the family attorney. Inside was a simple key and a note. Per the court's final order, the contents of the safety deposit box are now yours. I believe he would have wanted you to have this, regardless of the legal agreement. With Isabel Reed as her witness, Clara went to the bank. She opened box 714. Inside were not the feared, explosive journals. There was only a single leather-bound volume. and a small velvet box. She opened the book first. It was not a memoir. It was a love letter spanning 30 years. Entry after entry dated across decades, each one a snapshot of his life addressed to her. Poems he'd written, observations about his day, regrets, dreams, and always the enduring love for her. The last entry was dated the day of his accident. It read, "My dearest Clara, I saw you closing the shop tonight. You looked at the sky and I remembered why I breathe. I am coming to you now. I am finally choosing us. Whatever happens next, know this. Every beautiful thing I ever was or tried to be was because I knew you. Wait for me." Tears blurred the ink on the page. Then with trembling hands, she opened the velvet box. Inside was a ring, a simple, elegant band with a single diamond, not ostentatious but perfect, and a folded slip of paper with a lawyer's notation. Engagement ring, purchased by Elliot Vance on June 15, 1993, never presented. The date was 1 month after his father had issued the ultimatum, 1 month after he had walked away. He had bought the ring, but had never found the courage to give it to her. He had carried it, and this secret hope, for 30 years. Clara sat in the sterile bank room, the ring in one hand, the book of love letters in the other, and wept for the man who had loved her in the only way he knew how, completely in secret and too late in action. But the story was not finished. Because the final, devastating twist was not in the box, it was in the foundation. The settlement required the Vance family to transfer the $5 million seed fund. During the due diligence, the foundation's new accountants discovered something anomalous. A series of irregular, large transfers from Elliot's personal accounts over the past 5 years, totaling over $12 million, directed to a separate, dormant trust. A trust that was not mentioned in his will. A trust whose only beneficiary was Clara Renard, and whose only trustee was Elliot himself. He had been building a fortune for her in secret for years, a fortune she had never known about and had never asked for. He had been trying, in the only way he felt he could, to secure her future. The money was legally hers, and the discovery of this hidden trust would ignite one final, explosive confrontation, forcing Clara to make the most defining choice of her life. The discovery of the hidden trust did not come from the foundation's accountants. It came from a panic-stricken call from Arthur Greville, the family lawyer. He had been reviewing the final transfer documents when he noticed the anomalous account activity. His voice was a mixture of dread and awe when he told Clara, "He left you $12 million. He's been funding it for years." The news hit the Vance family like a second detonation. Charles Vance, who had accepted the $5 million foundation as a cost of doing business, saw this secret fund as a profound betrayal, not of money, but of intention. It proved Elliot's heart had never been in the empire. It was a $12 million monument to his defiance. Camille, the jilted fiancée, saw it as the ultimate insult and immediately filed a lawsuit challenging the trust's validity, claiming undue influence. The press, which had been pacified by the settlement, now had a feeding frenzy. "Secret fortune for secret love," the headlines screamed. Clara was besieged. Reporters camped outside her shop. Old acquaintances came out of the woodwork. She was no longer the sympathetic figure of a quiet love story. In the public eye, she was suddenly a potential heiress. The narrative was being rewritten around her, and she felt the truth of her life, the decades of simple work, of quiet longing, of dignified poverty, being erased by the spectacle of sudden wealth. She retreated, closing the shop for a week. In the silence of her apartment, surrounded by the scent of drying flowers and the leather-bound book of Elliot's letters, she faced the decision. The money was legally hers. It could mean security forever, freedom from worry, the ability to travel, to expand her business, to live in comfort. It was everything she had never asked for, everything Elliot had felt he could not give her openly in life. But taking it meant accepting a version of the story she knew was false. It would validate the gold digger narrative. It would entangle her forever in the Vance family's toxic orbit through endless litigation. It would reduce 30 years of genuine love to a financial transaction. She called Isabel Reed. "How do I give it back?" she asked. Her lawyer was silent for a moment. "Clara, it's $12 million. You could do immense good with it. You don't owe them anything." "It's not about owing them," Clara replied, her voice steady. "It's about owning my own story. That money was his guilt, not his love. His love is in this book. That's the only inheritance I want." Isabel, though pragmatic, understood. They devised a plan. Clara would not simply refuse the money. That would lead to more legal complexity. Instead, she would redirect it. She instructed Isabel to draw up papers disclaiming her personal beneficiary status and redirecting the entire $12 million into the Elliott Vance Foundation, specifically earmarked for its horticultural therapy programs. She would attach one non-negotiable condition: the foundation must be independently managed, with no Vance family member on its board. The Vance family would retain their $5 million obligation, but they would lose all control over the now $17 million foundation. It was a stunning move. When Charles Vance received the papers, he was, for the first time in his life, at a loss for words. He had spent his life understanding motivations in terms of profit and power. Clara's refusal of life-changing wealth made no sense to his calculus. It forced him, in a way no lawsuit ever could, to see her, and by extension, his son's love for her, as something real, something that existed outside the realm of assets and liabilities. He did not give his approval out of admiration. He gave it because it was, once again, the only sensible move. Fighting it would make him look vengeful and small. He signed. Camille's lawsuit, now targeting funds that were being given to charity, collapsed under the weight of terrible publicity. She settled for a confidential payout and disappeared from the society pages. Penelope, stripped of influence by her father, retreated to an estate in Europe. The public saga was over. The foundation, now robustly funded, began its work. A disused greenhouse on the city's south side was transformed into a vibrant community garden and training center. Clara, as a director, spent her days there, not behind a desk, but with her hands in the soil teaching. She found a new purpose, not in memorializing Elliott, but in channeling the profound, complicated gift of his love into something that grew and healed others. 1 year to the day after Elliott's funeral, Clara returned to the cemetery. She did not stand outside the gates this time. She walked in, carrying a small pot of white heather, a symbol of protection and wishes come true. She found his grave, a large, ornate stone etched with the Vance family crest. She knelt and placed the plant at its base. As she stood, she heard footsteps on the gravel path. She turned. It was Charles Vance. He was alone, without an assistant or a driver, looking older and more diminished than he had in the newspapers. They stood in silence for a long moment, two figures bound by a ghost. "He loved you very much," Charles said, the words seeming foreign in his mouth. "I know," Clara replied. "He loved you too, he just wanted you to be proud of him." Charles flinched, as if the observation were a physical blow. "I never gave him the chance to be anything else," he said, more to himself than to her. Then he did something unexpected. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small, faded photograph. He handed it to Clara. It was a picture of Elliott, around 8 years old, grinning widely, holding a trophy. On the back, in a child's handwriting, "For Dad." "He gave that to me after he won his first chess tournament," Charles said, his voice gravelly. "I told him second place was the first loser. I framed the trophy. I threw the photo in a drawer." He paused, looking at the headstone. "I have spent the last year reading your book, the one he left you. My lawyers procured a copy. I wanted to understand what I was fighting so hard to suppress." Clara felt a surge of protective anger, but she waited. Charles looked at her, his eyes weary. "He was a poet. I had a poet for a son, and I tried to turn him into a spreadsheet." He took a deep breath. "The foundation, the work you're doing, it's good. It's what he would have wanted. I would like to visit sometime if that's acceptable." Clara considered the man before her, the architect of her heartbreak, now just a grieving father burdened by regret. She felt no hatred, only a vast, quiet pity. "The gardens are open to the public, Mr. Vance," she said with gentle formality. "Everyone is welcome." He nodded, a silent thanks, and turned to leave. Then he stopped. "He bought you a ring," he said without turning around. "I found the receipt in his effects. 1993. I didn't understand it then." And with that, he walked away. Clara looked down at the simple band on her own finger, the one from the safety deposit box. She had never taken it off. She touched it now, a habit. The final, surprising detail of this entire story did not emerge in a legal document or a headline. It emerged in the Foundation's second year, during an audit. The accountants found one more irregularity: a single, massive transfer of $20 million made by Elliott Vance 6 months before his death. This money was not in a trust. It was a direct, outright purchase. He had bought, through several shell companies, the entire block of buildings that housed Clara's flower shop and the adjacent properties. He had paid off every mortgage, settled every lien, and then filed the deeds in a way that would never alert the owners until after his death. The tenants, including Clara, received letters from a management company informing them that their rents were now permanently fixed at $1 per year. for 99 years. The attached mission statement, written by Elliot, was simple: to preserve a place of beauty and peace in a changing city. He had not just been building a secret fortune for her, he had been building a secret world for her, a world where she could never be displaced, where her work and her community could endure. He had tried to create, from the distance his cowardice imposed, the security he had always wanted to give her. When Clara learned this, she did not cry. She went to her shop, stood in the center of the room, and looked at the walls she had painted, the shelves she had built, the life she had made here in spite of everything. And she laughed. It was a rich, full sound that echoed off the walls. She laughed at the absurdity, the grandeur, the heartbreaking ineptitude of his love. He could move mountains of money, orchestrate vast, secret plans, but he could not walk across the street and say, "Marry me." But now she understood. His love was not in the grand gestures, it was in the yearly rose, it was in the book of letters, it was in the safety of this shop, it was in the foundation that now helped hundreds. It was a love that had finally learned to speak, not in the language of the boardroom, but in the language of the life she valued. Clara Renard never married. She wore Elliot's ring, she tended her garden, she ran the foundation. And every year, on the anniversary of the day they met, she would close the shop and spend the afternoon in the community greenhouse. She would tell the story, not of a billionaire and a florist, but of two lonely people who found each other, and how love, even when it is forbidden, even when it is too late, can still change the world if you let it grow where it's planted. The legacy of Elliot Vance was not the skyscrapers that bore his name. It was a garden on the south side, a block of preserved storefronts, and a woman who taught others that beauty is not a luxury, but a necessity. And that is how a love that was hidden for 30 years finally came into the light, not with a scandal, but with a harvest. And what do we make of a love story that spent most of its life in the shadows? A connection that defied the rigid boundaries of class and expectation, only to be fully understood in its aftermath. The tale of Elliot and Clara forces us to ask uncomfortable questions about the invisible fences we build around our own hearts. How often do we choose the path of least resistance, trading authenticity for approval, and quiet our deepest longings because the cost of defiance seems too high? Their story is not a fairy tale. It is a testament to the profound consequences of living for someone else's blueprint. Elliot's 30-year journey was a slow awakening from a gilded slumber, a realization that success without meaning is the most exquisite form of poverty. And Clara's quiet dignity stands as a powerful rebuke to a world that often mistakes wealth for worth. She possessed a different kind of riches, integrity, resilience, and a capacity for love that asked for nothing but the truth. In the end, the most powerful legacy was not the fortune, but the foundation, not the secret, but the healing that followed its revelation. This story challenges a pervasive myth, that love alone can conquer all. Sometimes love needs courage as its partner. Sometimes it needs a stubborn faith that insists on blooming in the cracks of a concrete world. The true tragedy was not that they were kept apart, but that it took a lifetime for Elliot to find the courage that Clara carried all along. Their experience echoes in the quiet struggles of countless others who love across divides, of class, of culture, of family expectation. It asks us to examine the silent compromises we make, and the potential we have to either fortify walls or become bridge builders. As you go from here, consider the invisible gardens in your own life. The loves you have nurtured in secret, the dreams you have deferred for practicality, the parts of yourself you have hidden to fit in. What might happen if you allowed them a little sun? The story of the flower seller and the billionaire is ultimately a story about visibility. It asks us to see the people our systems render invisible, to value the quiet contributions over the loud acquisitions, and to remember that the most enduring monuments are not made of stone, but of seeds planted in hope. If this journey moved you, if it sparked a conversation in your own mind, share it with someone. Let it be a reminder that it is never too late to honor your truth. For more stories that explore the hidden contours of the human heart, subscribe and join our community. Don't forget to click the bell so you never miss a new documentary. Thank you for listening.